The hallway was too quiet for a hospital. No footsteps, no murmurs, only the faint hum of machines breathing for those who couldn't. At 2:14 a.m., one of them stopped. A nurse checked the monitor. Flatline. She didn't even look surprised. Time of death, she whispered to the doctor beside her. The doctor scribbled on a clipboard without lifting his eyes. Record it. Behind them, a man in gray overalls kept mopping the floor. He didn't move when the sound cut out. He just tightened his grip on the handle as if cleaning could stop time. That man was Daniel Reyes, 43, once the head maintenance supervisor of the entire facility. Now, after a round of layoffs, he was only the janitor who never left. They used to call him Mr. Reyes. Now they called him Hey You. He stared at the hospital bed in room 306. The boy lying there was 10. Brown hair flattened by weeks of stillness, skin pale against the white sheets. A tag already waited at the foot of the bed, not attached yet, but ready. Daniel's throat burned. Outside the glass wall, people moved like ghosts. The staff avoided looking in. Everyone knew who the child was. Evan Cole, only son of Richard Cole, the hospital's CEO. The boy who had everything. The man who owned everything. Daniel's mop water reflected the fluorescent lights, sterile, colorless. He dipped the mop again. No one noticed him. They never did. The door opened. 2 security officers stepped in. One carried a clipboard, the other a radio. They spoke quietly, like reading lines from a policy manual. Authorized personnel only after declaration. Daniel nodded. He'd heard the same line 100 times. They didn't ask him to leave, but their eyes said it. He set the bucket aside and walked to the corner. He wasn't supposed to be there when the machines were turned off, but he always stayed later than allowed. It wasn't defiance, it was habit. When you clean up after people long enough, you start seeing what others don't. The doctor's voice was dry. Prepare the paperwork for withdrawal. The nurse pressed her lips together. Yes, sir. Richard Cole entered without knocking. Tailored suit, perfect tie, eyes that looked through people instead of at them. He stood beside the bed, expression blank. Is it done? Yes, sir. Good. Make sure the body is transferred within the hour. I don't want press inside this wing. Daniel looked up from the floor. He had worked under Richard once, back when the man still shook hands with employees. That was before the merger, before the layoffs that reduced Daniel's department to 1. He wondered if Richard even remembered him. Richard turned to leave. His assistant followed, tapping notes on a tablet. No one said the word death. They didn't need to. It was routine. When the door closed, Daniel was alone with the boy. The lights buzzed softly. The air conditioner sighed. He could hear his own heartbeat. He walked to the bed. The sheet was still warm. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a thread of hair from the boy's forehead. Cold hands already, he muttered. He remembered the accident everyone in the city did. The CEO's car, the rain, the news flash about the critical condition. No one mentioned the driver who had tried to warn them about the slick road, Daniel's son Miguel, a maintenance worker doing a night shift on that same highway. Miguel died before the ambulance arrived. Daniel never got a call from anyone at the hospital. He found out from the morning broadcast. Now he cleaned the floor beneath the man who'd ignored that warning and beneath the man's son. He leaned against the wall, tired beyond words. Every joint in his hands ached. His pay had been cut 3 times in 2 years, but he stayed. Where else would he go? He couldn't even afford to bury his own boy properly. He looked at the still figure on the bed. A child, maybe not guilty of anything, just the price of someone else's control. Daniel exhaled slowly. You don't deserve this, kid, he whispered. His voice sounded too loud in the room. He checked the corridor. Empty. He leaned closer. You're not listening, are you? Or maybe you are. The heart monitor flickered once, a single spike, then silence again. He froze. Maybe it was nothing, a power fluctuation, a glitch. But he stared until the green light steadied no longer, flat. He didn't call anyone. He didn't dare. Instead, he whispered again, quieter. "You hang in there, okay?" The hallway lights dimmed automatically for the night cycle. Daniel returned to his mop, his motions slower now. He felt eyes on him even though the cameras faced away. Every hospital had them, but no one watched a janitor at 2 a.m. When he left the room, the monitor blinked once more. Morning rounds started at 6. By then the report was already filed. Patient expired at 2:14 a.m. No one double-checked the machines. They were too busy preparing a press statement. The boy's name would be mentioned only once as a tragedy, then replaced by financial updates. Daniel sat in the staff cafeteria drinking coffee that tasted like copper. 2 nurses at the next table were whispering. "Did you hear? They're keeping it quiet until the CEO flies in. He's already here. He left before we could say anything. I saw him. He didn't even look at the body. Would you if it was your own kid? I don't know." They noticed Daniel listening. One lowered her voice. "He creeps me out. Always cleaning that room. He's harmless. Still, it's weird." They stood up and left. Daniel finished his coffee, staring at the empty cup. He could still feel the warmth of the boy's forehead on his fingertips. At 8, Richard Cole returned with 2 men in suits. They spoke to the hospital director in low tones. Daniel watched from the far end of the hallway, pretending to clean a glass panel. He saw the stiffness in the CEO's jaw, the way his hands trembled before he shoved them into his pockets. For a moment, he looked human. Then he caught Daniel's reflection in the glass. "Do you need something?" Richard asked. Daniel hesitated. "No, sir." "Then get back to work." "Yes, sir." Richard's gaze lingered for a heartbeat. Recognition flickered, then vanished. He turned away. Daniel kept wiping the same spot until his knuckles whitened. The glass gleamed, but he didn't stop. By noon, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and grief. A small group of reporters had gathered outside cameras waiting. Security kept them behind the red line. The hospital's spokesperson recited prepared sentences about unfortunate outcomes and continued commitment to excellence. Inside, Daniel passed a row of employees whispering near the vending machines. "Poor kid. Must be nice, even death makes headlines for them." "Hey, keep your voice down." Someone laughed, not cruelly, just nervously. It stung anyway. He walked on. No one greeted him. He didn't expect them to. At the elevator, he pressed the button and waited. A reflection caught his eye. His uniform faded blue name tag cracked. He used to wear a different badge, shiny and gold, when he managed this entire wing. Now the new manager, 20 years younger, had replaced him without a handshake. The doors opened. Inside stood the nurse from the night before. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Reyes? You were there, weren't you?" "Yes. You didn't tell anyone." "Tell them what?" "The monitor." "I saw nothing," he said flatly. She looked away, voice trembling. "I thought it blinked, but maybe I imagined it." He didn't answer. The doors closed. That evening, as he clocked out, the supervisor stopped him at the exit. "Reyes management wants your ID reissued. New access limits. You're to clean only the ground floor starting tomorrow. Why orders from upstairs? The ICU is on my list." "Not anymore." He nodded. No argument. But inside, something sank deeper than anger. They weren't just taking his job piece by piece, they were erasing him from the one place he still belonged. He signed the form, handed over his old badge, and took the new one. The barcode was shorter, he noticed. The sun was already setting when he stepped outside. Reporters still waited near the main gate. He walked past them. None pointed a camera his way. Why would they? He was invisible. And yet in that invisibility he felt freer than any of them. At the bus stop he sat on the bench watching traffic slide by. He hadn't slept since the accident. Sometimes he heard Miguel's voice in the sound of passing tires, but he never turned to look. His phone buzzed a text from the shift coordinator. "Need you tonight. Extra hours available." He typed back, "I'll be there." He couldn't explain why. Maybe because the boy in room 306 was still there. Maybe because the monitor wasn't as silent as they thought. Night again. Same corridor. Different badge. He swiped in. The lock light turned green. He told himself it was habit cleaning after hours helped him think. But deep down, he knew it was something else. He opened the door to room 306. Darkness. Only the faint glow from the monitor. Still on. He stepped closer. The line was steady, not flat. A slow, fragile rhythm. Daniel froze. He checked the hallway empty. Then he whispered, barely audible, "You're fighting, aren't you?" No response. He sat on the stool beside the bed. For a long time he said nothing. Then, "I don't know why I'm here again. Maybe because nobody else is." The air felt heavier. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Do you know what it's like to be a raced kid? To walk in rooms you built and hear people pretend they don't see you?" He laughed once quietly. "They used to call me sir. Now I clean their footsteps." The monitor pulsed faster. 1, 2, pause, 1. He looked up sharply. It steadied again. He whispered, "If you can hear me, just stay. Don't go where my boy went." He stayed there until dawn. At 6 a.m., he walked down the corridor toward the locker room. A few nurses passed him. One nodded politely. Another whispered something behind her hand. He didn't listen. When he opened his locker, a folded note fell out. On it, one line in shaky handwriting. "Someone saw you in 306. Be careful." He stared at the paper for a long time. Then he tore it in half and dropped it into the trash. He wasn't sure who left it. Maybe the young nurse, maybe someone else who still had a conscience. Either way, it didn't matter. He already knew what it meant. They wanted him gone completely. He clocked out and walked toward the cafeteria. On the table near the window sat two old cleaners talking softly. One of them looked up and smiled faintly. "You look tired, Reyes. Long night." Another one. He nodded. The man shrugged. "Can't fix what's already broken." Daniel didn't reply. He stared out the window at the line of reporters still waiting outside. He thought of saying something to the camera crews, but who would believe a janitor? They'd laugh, call it grief or superstition. The truth was quieter than that. It lived in small movements, in half-heard breaths. He picked up his bucket, the handle creaking under the weight. As he walked away, his reflection followed on the polished floor, faint ghost-like, but still there. That was enough for now. If you've ever worked somewhere that forgot your name, you'll understand Daniel better than anyone. Maybe you've stood in a hallway and felt invisible too. If you have, I'd like to hear your story, not for sympathy, just so no one feels alone in that silence. He turned a corner and nearly collided with the hospital director. "Watch where you're going, Reyes." "Sorry, sir." The director straightened his tie. "You're lucky to still be here. Others would have been replaced." "Yes, sir." "Good. Keep it that way." The man walked off without another glance. Daniel watched him leave, then looked down at his uniform. A dark spot of water had spread across the chest pocket, shaped like nothing in particular. He wiped it away. That night, as rain started again, he returned to the ICU. He wasn't scheduled. He told security he'd forgotten his cleaning cart. They didn't question him. Inside 306, the air smelled faintly of ozone and antiseptic. He placed his hand on the monitor casing. Warm. Alive. He whispered, "They said you were gone. Maybe they're wrong." He pulled the stool close, sat down, and began talking. Not to beg, not to pray, just to speak into the void that had swallowed his own family. He told the boy about Miguel, about the road, about how nobody called, about how silence can hurt more than words. And as he spoke, the machines kept their slow, patient rhythm like someone breathing beneath the noise. Outside, a nurse passed. The door paused and listened. She didn't enter. Some things you don't interrupt. The clock read 2:14 a.m. again. Exactly 24 hours since the declaration. Daniel didn't notice. He was still talking. He didn't hear the first irregular beep. He looked up. The green line twitched faint but clear. He whispered, "Still here." The line moved again. He covered his mouth, afraid to make a sound. Then slowly he reached out and pressed the boy's hand. Warm. He whispered one word, no prayer, no order, just instinct. Stay. The light on the monitor glowed steady. There are moments when a single word can hold a life together. If this part of Daniel's story makes you hold your breath the way I did while writing it, keep listening. Stories like this one are what we share here, the quiet battles no headline ever shows. And if you stay with us, you'll never have to listen alone. The rain intensified outside. The power flickered once recovered. Daniel kept his hand on the boys until morning light bled into the corridor. When the day shift staff arrived, he stood, straightened his uniform, and slipped out before anyone saw. He didn't tell a soul what happened. Not yet. The machines kept breathing. For now, that was enough. Morning settled over the hospital like fog that refused to lift. The air carried bleach coffee and the faint hum of machines beginning another day. No announcement, no alarm, just the quiet shift between night and survival. Daniel Reyes was still awake. He hadn't left the building. He couldn't. He'd watched the sky lighten through the narrow windows above the ICU wing, watched nurses change shifts and new voices replace old ones. The hallway outside room 306 smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion. He stood beside his cart pretending to inventory supplies, but his eyes kept sliding toward the glass. Inside, the boy was still there. So was the rhythm. Slow, irregular, alive. A doctor passed by, speaking into a recorder. Prepare transfer papers. Maintain status deceased until board review. Daniel kept his head down. He was used to hearing decisions made in sentences shorter than a breath. He wiped the same patch of floor again. The mop left a thin streak of water that caught the fluorescent light. He moved it in silence, steady, precise, the way he used to move surgical carts years ago before titles changed and names were forgotten. 2 interns walked past, laughing. Heard the CEOs flying out again. "Wouldn't you?" Their voices faded down the corridor. Daniel kept mopping. It was easier than thinking. He clocked out for breakfast he wouldn't eat. The cafeteria was loud with clattering trays and hollow chatter. Someone had turned on the TV again. The screen showed Richard Cole shaking hands with city officials, the headline beneath CEO Cole launches Children's Health Initiative. Daniel stared until the coffee in his cup went cold. He thought of the boy upstairs, the same last name, the same silence, the same press smiling around tragedy. He left the cup untouched and went back to work. At 9 o'clock, the maintenance office door creaked. The new supervisor leaned in, cheerful in that professional way that hides warning under courtesy. "Morning, Reyes. Need you to cover storage instead of ICU. I'm already assigned to ICU. Not anymore. Orders. Whose doesn't matter. Move your cart." Daniel nodded once. "Yes, sir." He packed his supplies, slowly folding each rag as if time could be stretched by precision. When he closed the cart lid, the clang echoed down the hallway like a door shutting on a memory. As he pushed toward the service elevator, he passed room 306 again. The blinds were half drawn now. Someone had left them that way deliberately. A warning, stay out. He paused anyway. Through the sliver of glass, he saw a nurse adjusting tubing, another updating the chart, and in between them the faintest twitch beneath the blanket. A reflex, maybe, or something else. He didn't know. He only knew he'd seen it. The nurse noticed him and frowned. "Sir, this area's restricted. I'm moving my cart." "Then move it." He did, but his eyes stayed on the door until the elevator closed. Downstairs, the storage level hummed with machinery and cold air. Pipes rattled overhead. Fluorescent bulbs flickered, the kind no one replaced until they died completely. Daniel unlocked the cage where old monitors and wheelchairs waited for disposal. Dust coated everything evenly like snow that never melted. He worked alone for hours, sorting, labeling, not thinking. Still, his mind replayed the small movement on the bed. Each time he told himself it was nothing, it sounded less convincing. By noon, he'd finished the checklist. He sat on a crate, rubbed his temples, and opened the small notebook Clara had slipped into his pocket before leaving the night shift. A plain cover, no hospital logo. Inside, one line in her handwriting. "Watch. Write. Don't speak yet." He stared at the words until they blurred. Then he closed the book and put it away. When he returned upstairs for supplies, the atmosphere had changed. Too many people in suits for a weekday. Executives, consultants, public relations faces. They moved through corridors like they owned the air. Daniel kept to the edges. He caught fragments as they passed. Press statement ready at 4. Use the foundation angle. Emphasize community impact. Not one mention of the boy. Not one. He turned down the back corridor and almost collided with Clara. She grabbed his arm before he could apologize. "They're moving him tonight," she whispered. "Not morning. Tonight. We're private facility. Cole's order." Her voice trembled. "They're calling it final transition." Daniel looked past her shoulder, a camera crew setting up near the lobby. He asked, "You can't stop it. They don't listen to nurses." Her eyes glistened. "You were the only one who stayed. If you saw anything, say it now." He didn't answer. He couldn't, because truth from his mouth would sound like madness. That evening, rain returned. It fell hard against the glass, washing the city into blurred streaks of light. The corridors thinned again. Most staff clocked out early, leaving only the overnight crew and security. Daniel's shift ended at 10. He didn't go home. He left his cart in storage and walked the long way back upstairs. No badge this time, the door to ICU was propped open by a folded towel. He stepped through like he'd never left. The hallway was dim. Room 306 glowed faintly under the blue monitor light. No guards yet. He walked in. Evan lay motionless, but not the same. His color was less pale. His chest rose slower, deeper. Daniel stood at the bedside, afraid to speak. Afraid not to. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. The machines answered with rhythm. "I'm not sure why I came back. Maybe because they're coming for you." He rubbed his hands together to hide the shaking. "Maybe because no one stopped them when it was my son." He looked at the window. The city lights flickered behind sheets of rain. His reflection looked like someone older, smaller, half erased. He turned back. "I'm sorry, kid. I couldn't save him. Maybe I can keep you from being turned into another announcement." He reached out and brushed a thread from the blanket. Under his fingers, warmth. Not imagined. Real. He froze. The monitor blipped once, then again. Then steadied higher than before. His chest tightened. He whispered, "You hear me, don't you?" No reply, just the same quiet pulse of proof. The door clicked behind him. He spun around. Richard Cole stood in the doorway. No entourage, no cameras, just him, rain still clinging to his coat. "What are you doing here?" Daniel straightened. "Cleaning. At this hour, some messes don't wait for daylight." Richard stepped closer. "You're not supposed to be on this floor." I figured I was already invisible. Richard's jaw twitched. "Step away from the bed." Daniel didn't move. "He's breathing different," Daniel said quietly. "Your machines say otherwise. Your machines are wrong." Richard's voice dropped to a whisper edged with exhaustion. "Do you think I want to believe he's gone?" "I think you stopped looking." Silence pressed between them. Then Richard said, "You were the one in the report last night." "I was. They're investigating you." "I know. Then why risk more?" Daniel looked at the boy. "Because this one's still here." Richard's eyes flicked to the monitor. The rhythm was undeniable now, slow but rising. He whispered almost to himself, "Impossible." Daniel answered, "Not impossible. Just ignored." Minutes stretched into something heavier than time. Finally, Richard pressed the intercom. "Page Neurology. Now." He didn't look at Daniel. He kept his eyes on the monitor, on the proof he'd been avoiding. Within minutes, a doctor and nurse entered, startled to see both men there. Richard said only, "Run another evaluation." The doctor hesitated. "Sir, the declaration. Run it." They obeyed. Machines connected. Lights blinked, numbers scrolled. No one spoke until the last reading appeared. The doctor cleared his throat. "There's measurable response." Richard stared at him. "Define measurable. Brain activity above baseline. It's not residual." The words hung in the air like a sound none of them knew how to name. Richard looked at Daniel. Daniel didn't move. The doctor waited for instructions. Richard said quietly, "Continue observation. No transfer." "Yes, sir." They left as quickly as they came. The room went still again. Only Daniel and Richard remained. The CEO sat down in the chair Daniel had used for nights. He rubbed his temples. "When did you last sleep?" Daniel asked. "Can't remember." "You should. Don't tell me what I should do. I'm telling you as someone who's been awake too long." Richard gave a short, tired laugh. "I built this place to save lives. And now I'm praying a janitor was right." Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to. Outside, the rain softened. Inside, the machines kept rhythm. One small, stubborn sound against a city that had already moved on. Hours later, dawn crept over the skyline again. The hospital buzzed with muted disbelief. Whispers spread faster than updates. "He's responding." They said impossible. Someone made a mistake. Daniel stood by the window in the corridor, watching morning unfold like a truth too fragile to touch. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just breathed, matching the rhythm inside the room. Clara approached quietly. "You were right. I only stayed. Sometimes that's enough." She handed him a new badge. "Temporary access reinstated." "Richard Cole signed it himself," she said. Daniel took it unsure what to feel. Clara added softly, "You should tell your story someday." He shook his head. "This isn't my story." She looked toward the room. "It is now." They stood in silence. Beyond the glass, the boy's fingers twitched. Small, deliberate, alive. If you've ever been dismissed, replaced, or talked over and still showed up anyway, you know what it means to live in the shadows and keep a light alive. That's what this space is for stories of the unseen, the unheard, the ones who stay. If Daniel's story found you tonight, stay with us for the next one. Sometimes listening is the only miracle left. The monitor in room 306 kept its quiet pulse. Outside, morning settled again, not peaceful but real. And for the first time in years, Daniel Reyes didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The morning after the impossible felt heavier than the one before. News hadn't broken yet, but the air already knew. Whispers moved faster than sound, carried by looks, by the hush that followed Daniel when he passed. Something had shifted in the building, not loud, not visible, but deep enough that everyone felt it. Daniel Reyes had not gone home. He'd stayed in the corridor outside room 306, sitting on a plastic chair that bent under his weight. He hadn't changed clothes. He hadn't slept. The coffee in his hand was cold, untouched. Through the glass, the boy's monitor glowed steady. The rhythm had held all night. No dips, no flat line, no explanation. Clara walked up quietly, hair tied back, eyes rimmed red. "You're still here?" Daniel nodded. "They'll make it official soon," she whispered. "They can't hide it much longer." "I know." She hesitated, glancing down the hall. "They'll also look for someone to blame." "I know that too." Her hand brushed his shoulder light, uncertain. "Don't be here when the press arrives," she said. He looked through the glass again. "I was here when he woke. I'll be here when they notice." Clara didn't argue. She just said, "Then at least eat something," and walked away. By mid-morning, the first ripple of chaos reached them. A man in a dark suit rushed through the ICU doors, followed by 2 assistants. Behind him, Richard Cole walked slower, deliberate, composed, the kind of calm that came only from habit. A single look from him cleared the corridor. No one wanted to be in his path. Daniel stood. Their eyes met through the glass. No words, just recognition, something between defiance and respect. Richard entered the room. Daniel stayed outside. He could see the doctors talking fast papers, changing hands, the boy's name rewritten from deceased to critical active monitoring. Each stroke of the pen rewrote more than a chart. When Richard stepped out, reporters were already pushing past security. A voice shouted, "Mr. Cole, is it true your son?" "No statements," he said, walking past the noise. His jaw was tight. He didn't stop until he reached Daniel. "You said he was alive," Richard said quietly. Daniel answered, "He is. You realize what this means. It means I wasn't wrong. It also means everything I built will be torn apart before noon." Daniel's reply was simple. Then maybe it needed tearing. For a heartbeat, Richard looked like he might say something cruel, but instead he turned away, muttering, "Stay close, but stay quiet." The hospital became a hive. Cameras flashed. Security sealed doors. Executives whispered in corners. Doctors who had called the case hopeless 2 days earlier now spoke in vague, careful phrases. Spontaneous neural restoration. Unexplained recovery. Pending verification. Daniel watched it unfold with the patience of someone who had already seen what came after headline silence. He tried to work. He mopped straightened chairs, pretended not to hear. But every few minutes he found himself drifting back to the window of 306. Inside, the boy's eyes flickered beneath closed lids. Not open yet, but trying. He could almost feel it, the pull between worlds. A small crowd gathered outside the ICU. A reporter spoke into a camera. Sources inside the hospital confirm that Evan Cole, son of CEO Richard Cole, has shown unexpected brain activity less than 48 hours after being declared clinically dead. Daniel froze. That sentence would travel everywhere before the hour ended. By early afternoon, chaos had found its shape. The hospital's lobby became a stage. Flashbulbs, questions, guards. Somewhere upstairs, doctors still checked machines. Downstairs, the world demanded miracles on schedule. Daniel avoided the lobby. He stayed near the service elevators, listening to the echoes of voices filtered through concrete. He didn't need to see. He could imagine every word. Clara found him again. "They're saying the janitor was the first to notice," she whispered. "You should hide for a bit. I didn't do anything." "Exactly. That's why they'll choose you. It's cleaner that way." He looked at her weary. "I'm tired of hiding." "Then be ready." She pressed something into his hand, a folded paper. Inside was a printed notice, internal inquiry, unauthorized access ICU, wing his name at the top. Issued that morning. He smiled without humor. "They work fast." "They're scared," Clara said. "They think miracles ruin reputations." He slipped the paper into his pocket. "If they call me in, I'll go. Don't say anything without me there." He nodded, though he already knew he wouldn't keep that promise. By evening, the sky outside turned copper. The hospital's floodlights blinked on cold and white. Daniel stood by a vending machine, coins in his hand, pretending to choose a drink he didn't want. Two orderlies walked past, talking low. "Did you hear Cole's pulling legal files?" "About the kid, about the staff. Someone leaked that a janitor was in the room, that you." The other laughed. "Wish it was. He's famous now." Daniel waited until they were gone before letting the coins drop back into his pocket. Inside room 306, everything had changed again. Doctors came in and out, whispering into recorders, adjusting settings. The monitors beeped steady, but their eyes looked nervous, as if the machines were mocking them. Richard Cole stood in the corner, silent, arms crossed. He hadn't left all day. When Daniel entered, Richard didn't turn. "You shouldn't be here," Richard said. "They already know I was. Then you should be home. Home's been gone a long time." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "I keep thinking about what I said to you last night. You said I didn't belong here. I was wrong." The words landed heavier than apology. Daniel nodded. He moved closer to the bed. Evan's eyelids trembled. Richard leaned forward, gripping the rail. The boy's fingers twitched. Then, faintly, a whisper, not words, just breath, but it was his own. Both men froze. Daniel looked at the monitor. Numbers rose. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came. He reached for his son's hand, voice shaking. "Evan, it's Dad." The boy's head shifted, the faintest nod. It lasted seconds. It changed everything. Outside the room, voices surged again, nurses running, someone shouting for neurology cameras flashing through glass. The hospital had no protocol for resurrection. Daniel backed away, letting the doctors swarm in. He stood at the door, half inside, half out, invisible again amid the noise. But this time, the invisibility felt different. It wasn't absence. It was purpose fulfilled. He watched Richard collapse into the chair beside the bed, both hands over his face. Not the posture of a CEO, the posture of a father. Daniel turned to leave, but a voice stopped him. "Reyes." A security officer jogged up. "You're needed in conference room B. Now." "What for inquiry panel?" Daniel exhaled. Of course. Conference B smelled of paper and tension. 5 people at the table, legal administration, public relations, and a compliance officer. They gestured for him to sit. Mr. Reyes, the compliance officer, began tone clinical. "We have reports placing you in the ICU after hours on multiple occasions." "Yes." "Can you explain your reason for entry? I clean there." "Outside your assigned schedule." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at each of them. "Because someone needed to." Murmurs, pens, paper shuffling. "Are you aware that unauthorized access violates policy 4.1T? "I am." "And yet, you continued." "Yes." "Were you aware the patient in question was the CEO's son?" "Everyone was." "Did you tamper with any medical equipment?" "No." "Did you touch the patient?" "Yes." Silence. "For what reason?" He looked cold. The compliance officer blinked. You touched him because he looked cold." Daniel nodded. "That's all." They scribbled notes, trading glances that mixed disbelief and irritation. Finally, one said, "You understand that legally what occurred afterward places this institution under scrutiny. I understand you need someone to blame. Mr. Reyes, you asked what I did. I told you. You asked why. I told you that too. If you want to know what happened, ask the boy. That ended the meeting. When Daniel walked out, the hallway was lined with reporters. Flashbulbs burst like white heat. Questions blurred into noise. Is it true you revived him? Did you touch the machines? Are you working with the family? He said nothing. Security guided him through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Hero Janitor, another fraud." The words collided, canceling each other out. Outside, the air was cold and wet. Rain had stopped, but puddles reflected the flashing lights of cameras like restless stars. He walked past them all through the side gate into the quiet street. Night again. The city glowed under drizzle. Daniel stood at the bus stop, soaked the inquiry paper softening in his pocket. Across the street, the hospital windows shone like eyes that couldn't sleep. One of them was room 306. He thought of going home. He thought of disappearing. But then he remembered the boy's breath, small human alive, and the sound of Richard's voice breaking on the word son. He stayed. He crossed back through the gate, through security that no longer stopped him, and climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. The hallways were quiet again. Reporters had been pushed outside. Only the hum of machines remained the sound that meant life. He stood by the door. Inside, Richard sat beside the bed, head bowed. He didn't notice Daniel at first. Then he did. Their eyes met through the reflection. Richard motioned him in. Daniel entered without a word. For a while, neither spoke. They watched the boy's chest rise slow, steady. Then Richard said softly, "When I built this place, I wanted perfection. No noise, no mistakes. Silence meant control." He paused. "Now I'd give everything I own just to hear him breathe louder." Daniel said quietly, "Silence isn't peace. It's just the space before someone listens." Richard looked at him. Really looked this time. "You think that's what you did?" "Listened." Daniel shrugged. "It's all I know how to do." They sat there together. Two men bound by a sound both had almost forgotten. The rain stopped completely. The monitors hummed. A faint sigh escaped the boy's lips, and for the first time since the night the machines went silent, the world began to breathe again. The rain had stopped, but the building still dripped. Gutters murmured, wheels rolled on tile vents, hummed. Morning light crawled across the city like something unsure of its welcome. Inside the hospital, no one slept. Reporters camped on sidewalks. Camera lights flashed through glass. The word miracle had spread before dawn, multiplying faster than truth could keep up. Daniel Reyes was back at work, mop in hand, eyes hollow from hours that had stopped meaning anything. He moved quietly through the corridors, careful not to look at the cameras stationed near the elevators. Every time he passed a nurse, a whisper followed. "That's him. Don't stare." "Do you think he really—" He didn't answer any of it. He just kept moving. By mid-morning, the building filled with strangers. Legal advisors, board members, people who smelled like perfume and urgency. They carried folders instead of empathy. They talked in sentences that ended with numbers, not names. Daniel pushed his cart past them toward the ICU. Clara caught up halfway down the hall, a clipboard in her hands. "You shouldn't be here today," she whispered. "I work here." "Not anymore. They reassigned you. We're basement utilities. No patient access." He nodded slowly. "That didn't take long." "They're protecting you," she said. "No. They're protecting themselves." She looked both ways, lowered her voice. "The boy opened his eyes an hour ago." Daniel froze. For how long? Seconds, maybe less. But it happened. She smiled faintly. "They'll deny it until the press forces them to confirm." "Does he know anyone?" Not yet. But his vitals are strong. For the first time since that night, Daniel let out a real breath. Then he asked quietly, "How's his father?" Clara's smile vanished. "Worse. He hasn't left the room. Barely talks." Richard Cole looked nothing like the man who owned half the city. He sat in the corner of room 306, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at the boy as though afraid the sight might vanish if he blinked. The machines pulsed steady. Evan's eyes moved beneath half-open lids. Alive. Barely. Enough. A doctor entered, murmured updates Daniel couldn't hear through the glass. Richard didn't move. He just nodded once, like each word added weight to something invisible on his shoulders. When the doctor left, Richard rose, stepped to the window, and drew the blinds halfway. For a moment, his reflection overlapped with his son's face in the glass. He turned away quickly, as if ashamed of the symmetry. At noon, the hospital released a statement. Words crafted by lawyers, polished by PR. Following ongoing evaluation, we can confirm that patient EC exhibits limited but measurable neurological response. Further updates will follow, pending assessment. No mention of Daniel. No mention of the night the machines went silent. Only limited response. Enough to own the miracle, not enough to share it. When the bulletin hit the networks, the lobby filled again. Someone recognized Daniel in the corner near the maintenance station. A phone rose, camera blinking red. "Hey, are you the janitor?" He turned away. More voices followed. "Tell us what you saw. Did he talk to you? Did you touch him?" He kept walking. A security guard stepped in, guiding him toward the stairwell. "Back entrance," the guard whispered. "Thanks," Daniel muttered. He descended 3 flights before stopping. The echo of questions still clung to his ears. He pressed a hand to the wall to steady himself. For the first time, the miracle felt dangerous. Down in the basement, the hum of old machinery replaced the noise of fame. Pipes rattled like tired lungs. The air smelled of rust and disinfectant. Daniel preferred it. Here, things were honest, broken loud, but real. He checked gauges, emptied bins, signed a logbook. Every motion was deliberate, grounding him back to the part of life that didn't care who he was. He stayed there until his hands stopped shaking. Then the door opened. Clara again, face pale, breath quick. "They're calling you upstairs." "Why board meeting?" Richard requested it. Daniel blinked. "Requested me?" "Yes. I'm a janitor. Not today." Conference room A looked like it had been built for intimidation. Glass walls. Long table. 10 suits. At the far end, Richard sat with a folder open before him. He looked up as Daniel entered. "Sit down." Daniel obeyed. He didn't belong there, and everyone knew it. A woman in gray spoke first. "Mr. Reyes. The hospital is under intense scrutiny. We need to align our accounts before press escalation." "I don't have an account," he said. "You were present during the event that preceded neurological recovery. I was cleaning. Did you say anything to the patient?" "Yes." "What?" Daniel looked at Richard. "You're not gone." Whispers rippled down the table. The woman frowned. "Why would you say that to a clinically dead patient? Because he wasn't." Silence. Richard's voice broke it. "Mr. Reyes, I've reviewed security footage. You were in the room for 7 minutes after staff left. No unauthorized equipment access. No interference. Just presence." Daniel nodded once. "That's all I have." The woman in gray leaned forward. "For the record, we ask you, refrain from further contact with media." "I don't talk to cameras." "Good." The meeting ended not with dismissal, but with exhaustion. As Daniel rose, Richard said quietly, "Stay outside." When the others filed out, Richard closed the door. He stood there, hands trembling slightly. "Why did you go back that night?" Daniel answered honestly. I couldn't leave him alone. Richard stared at the table. You think that matters? Yes. Richard's laugh was small, bitter. You remind me of someone who used to work here, before all this became an empire. What happened to him, Richard said. He learned miracles don't come free. By evening, the city had turned its obsession into noise. Talk shows debated faith versus science. Analysts discussed stock projections for the hospital network. A pastor called it divine intervention. A skeptic called it error. Only Daniel stayed quiet. He mopped the same floor again, slower this time, listening to the building breathe. Then Clara found him face pale. They're releasing him tomorrow. So soon, private facility. No visitors. Not even you. Especially not me. They've sealed records. Daniel leaned on the mop handle. Does he know what happened? No one's told him. She hesitated, then whispered, Richard's meeting with you again tonight. He said it's important. Daniel didn't ask why. He already knew the shape of that word goodbye. The office on the top floor overlooked the city glass metal, the glow of success pretending to be peace. Richard stood by the window, tie loosened eyes darker than the skyline behind him. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Daniel stayed standing. Richard didn't insist. They'll come after you, Richard said. For what? For being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Daniel half smiled. Story of my life. Richard turned from the window. They want to use your image. The humble worker who witnessed hope. It'll sell better than any campaign. I don't want that. I know. That's why it'll work. He walked closer, placed an envelope on the desk. Inside a check unsigned. Take it, he said. Daniel didn't move. What is it, Severance? Silence. Gratitude, whatever name you prefer. I didn't ask for payment. It's not payment. It's protection. From you, from everyone else. They stood there in the quiet that comes after truth. Daniel finally said, You're afraid the miracle doesn't belong to you. Richard didn't deny it. He only whispered, It doesn't belong to anyone. Then he turned away. Leave before morning. They'll make it look kind, but it won't be. Daniel stepped back toward the door. Keep him safe, he said. Richard nodded without turning. He left the building that night carrying nothing but the envelope. The air outside was cold, the city restless. Somewhere behind him, flashes from cameras painted the hospital walls white. He walked until they couldn't find him anymore. He rented a room above a diner 2 streets away. Small, quiet. The kind of place where no one asked names. He sat on the bed, stared at the check, and tore it in half. Then again until the pieces fit in his palm like dust. He flushed them down the sink. Water swallowed the silence. He leaned on the counter, listening to the city hum through the window. Somewhere in that noise, a boy was breathing. That was enough. Morning came gray and empty. Daniel walked back to the hospital gates, but didn't enter. Reporters still clustered outside, chasing the latest statement. He stayed across the street unnoticed. Through the upper windows, he saw movement blinds opening, then closing. A convoy of black cars waited by the side entrance. He watched as a stretcher appeared, surrounded by nurses. The boy's face was hidden, but Daniel knew. He watched until the cars drove away. Clara stepped outside moments later, scanning the crowd. She spotted him, crossed quickly, coat pulled tight. They're taking him to the mountain facility, she said. No visitors allowed. He nodded. Will he be okay? They think so. And you? I'll be reassigned. They don't like witnesses. He almost smiled. You'll find another place? I don't want another place, she said. Then softer. You saved him. Daniel shook his head. No. He saved himself. I just stayed long enough to see it. They stood there, two ghosts, watching a miracle being escorted away like contraband. That night, news broke officially. CEO Richard Cole's son, previously declared brain dead, shows remarkable recovery. Clips of the hospital flooded every screen. One photo appeared again and again, grainy footage of Daniel pushing a cleaning cart. No face, just posture. The caption read, "Unidentified staff member reportedly first to notice change." He turned the TV off. He didn't need the world to know his name. Names had never protected him. He opened the notebook Clara had given him. The pages were mostly blank except for one line written that morning. "Still here." He added another beneath it. "That's enough." Outside, the rain began again. Gentle this time, not punishment, but release. Daniel watched it through the window until the glass blurred. For the first time in years, he let himself close his eyes. And somewhere far above, in a room that used to be called 306, a boy whispered his first real word. "Dad." The city forgot quickly. It always did. Yesterday's miracle was today's press release. Headlines moved on, flashing from tragedy to politics to weather. By the end of the week, the story of the CEO's resurrected son had become background noise, something people mentioned between coffee refills. But not everyone moved on. Somewhere in the gray belly of the city, Daniel Reyes was still cleaning floors. No one looked at in buildings that pretended they were alive. He worked nights now, different hospital, smaller pay, different badge, same silence. He didn't talk about what happened. He didn't have to. The whispers followed him anyway, that he'd touched a dead boy, and made him breathe, that he'd been paid to vanish, that he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. He ignored all of it. Until one night, the whisper turned into a knock. The clock showed 2:13 a.m. The hallway was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Daniel was mopping near the elevators when the security phone at the desk rang. No one else was around. He hesitated, then picked it up. A voice whispered, "They moved him again." He froze. "Who is this click?" Silence. He stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, long after the line went dead. Then he hung up, wiped his hands on his uniform, and walked outside. The rain had started again, steady, endless. It always came back. Across town, the Cole Tower glowed like a monument to untouchable things. Dozens of floors mirrored glass lights that never turned off. At the very top, the man who had tried to silence the miracle. Richard Cole sat in his office, staring at a screen showing muted news footage of himself. The same smile he'd practiced for cameras looked hollow on playback. He muted the video and turned toward the window. The reflection that looked back wasn't a CEO. It was a father who hadn't slept since the boy opened his eyes. The doctors at the private facility sent reports every hour. All stable, all improving, all without explanation. But the word miracle never appeared in their notes. They preferred anomaly. It made the impossible sound manageable. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. His assistant entered, holding a file. "Sir, the board requested an update." "On my son. On the narrative." Richard closed his eyes. "They want the janitor." "Yes, sir. There's demand for a follow-up piece. The human angle." Richard said nothing. The assistant waited uncomfortable. "Should I decline?" He finally answered, voice quiet. "No. Find him." The next morning, Daniel was finishing his shift when two men in suits approached. They weren't police, but they had that practiced stillness that said, "Don't ask questions." One of them showed a card. "Mr. Reyes." "Yes. Mr. Cole would like to speak with you." "About what?" "He said you'd know." He did. They offered to drive him. He refused. He walked instead. By the time he reached the Cole Tower, the sun had climbed behind the haze. The lobby looked like a cathedral made of money. The receptionist didn't ask his name. She just pressed a button and said, "He's here." Richard stood by the window again when Daniel entered. Same office, same view, different air. He turned slowly. "You came." "I walk fast," Daniel said. Richard half smiled. "You look worse." "You look richer." The smile vanished. They stood a moment in the kind of silence that held history. Then Richard said, "He keeps asking for you." Daniel blinked. "What?" "My son. Every morning. First words your name." The sentence hit harder than Richard expected. He tried to sound casual. "Doctors say it's normal memory association, emotional imprint. They want to run scans to study it." Daniel frowned. "He's not a specimen." "I know." "Do you—" Richard didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer. "Why am I here?" Richard gestured to a folder on the desk. "Because I can't keep lying to him. Or myself. What's that proof? Of what they did to him before you found him. You were right. The hospitals, the contracts, the fake treatments, all of it built on keeping him broken." He opened the folder. Inside were copies of the same reports Daniel had seen weeks ago, doctored signatures, invoices marked retainer renewal, medical trial codes that never existed. "They used my son Richard," said quietly. "And I paid them too." His voice cracked. "I thought I was saving him. All I did was fund his pain." Daniel looked down at the papers. "Why show me this?" "Because I'm about to burn the world that built it." He slid another file forward. "I want you to stand beside me when I do." Later that afternoon, Richard held a press conference. The same network lights, the same reporters who'd once hunted Daniel for a quote. But this time the CEO wasn't there to sell anything. He stood before the cameras and said, "For years I trusted power more than people. I believed miracles were things you bought, not things you met. I was wrong." Behind him, screens showed hospital documents. He continued, voice steady. "My son was never beyond help. He was beyond honesty. The system I built taught doctors to protect profit over truth. It ends today." Reporters shouted questions. He didn't answer them. He finished with one line. "The man you called a janitor saw my son when I didn't. You should ask him what it means to listen." Daniel was standing just beyond the lights. He said nothing, only nodded once. That was enough. The backlash came fast. Shareholders panicked. Legal departments exploded with warnings. Investors called it madness. But the public didn't see madness. They saw a father standing beside the man who'd cleaned his floors. For the first time, both looked human. That night, every network replayed the moment. The footage of Richard stepping aside so Daniel could stand in frame beside him. The silence that followed said more than speeches ever could. When the cameras turned off, Richard said quietly, "You've just made powerful enemies." Daniel replied, "So have you." Richard smiled faintly. "Then we'll see who listens louder." A week later, Daniel visited the private facility not as a janitor, but as a guest. Security checked his name twice, then led him through white corridors that smelled too clean to be honest. He entered a small room lined with glass. On the other side sat Evan, smaller than he remembered, eyes clear but distant. When Evan saw him, he smiled. "Grace," he said softly. Daniel froze. "What did you say?" The boy frowned, then corrected himself. "Daniel." He grinned, embarrassed. It just felt like that name meant something. Daniel's throat tightened. "It means you're safe now." They talked for a while, mostly small things, the food, the sound of rain, the nurse's strange habits. Evan's voice was thin but steady. When Daniel rose to leave, the boy said quietly, "Thank you for hearing me when no one did." Daniel answered, "That's what people are supposed to do." Outside, Richard waited by the car. "He remembers you," he said. "I remember him too." Richard looked up at the gray sky. "They'll keep digging for what happened that night. The doctors, the investors, the press, They all want to explain it away. Let them, Daniel said. They can't explain faith. Richard nodded slowly. Do you believe it was faith? Daniel looked at him. No. It was love. Faith's just what people call it when they're afraid to say that word. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Richard said, The foundation we talked about, it's real now. For kids like him. For families like yours. Daniel turned to him. I don't have one anymore. Richard hesitated. You do now. Weeks passed. The world turned its eyes to new tragedies, new miracles. But in one quiet wing of a new hospital bearing no logos, children who couldn't hear began to smile at the sound of footsteps. Daniel worked there again, not as janitor, not as miracle worker, just as Daniel. He cleaned the rooms, fixed. The lights sat beside kids who didn't know his name, but trusted his calm. Sometimes when the hall was empty, he'd pause outside a small office where Richard sat surrounded by papers. The CEO no longer looked like one. His sleeves were rolled, his phone forgotten, his voice low as he read letters from parents across the world. Sometimes he'd look up and see Daniel watching. Their eyes would meet and no words were needed. One evening, as the sun sank behind the windows, Evan ran through the hall, laughing, hair-messy bandages gone. He stopped at Daniel's side holding a small, folded note. Dad told me to give you this. Daniel took it. The handwriting was Richard's. We can't undo what we were, but we can choose who hears us now. Daniel folded the paper, slipped it into his pocket beside the old photo of his son. Then he looked at Evan. You're running too fast. I'm catching up. Daniel smiled. Then don't stop. They walked toward the garden together, the boy, the man who once lived in the shadows, and the sound of laughter that finally felt earned. That night, long after the lights went out, Daniel sat by the window of his small apartment above the new hospital. The city hummed below, steady and alive. He could hear the rain again, not as noise, but as proof. Every drop sounded like a voice that had finally learned how to be heard. The new hospital breathed differently. It wasn't built from ambition. It was built from guilt that had learned how to heal. No logos, no slogans, no marble walls. Just corridors painted soft doors that never locked, and children who no longer flinched at the sound of machines. Every morning Daniel arrived before sunrise. He mopped the hallways while the world was still half asleep. He liked that hour when even silence felt kind. Sometimes he'd see Evan sitting by the window of the garden room sketching shapes in a small notebook. The boy always waved. Daniel always waved back. It became their routine. No words, just quiet recognition, a rhythm that meant they'd both survived something unexplainable. One afternoon a visitor came. A woman in a dark coat holding a folder too heavy for its size. She didn't introduce herself at first. She just said, "You were there, weren't you?" Daniel didn't answer. "I'm from the commission," she added. "Medical Ethics Division. We're reopening the case." He kept mopping. She followed him down the hall. They covered too much. The falsified charts, the missing scans, the erased signatures. All of it traces back to Cole Health Group. "I don't work for them." "Maybe not," she said. "But you're the only one who saw what happened that night." He stopped, mop dripping onto the tile. "You think I can prove something I think you already did. They just buried it." He studied her face. "You're not here for truth. You're here for leverage." She didn't deny it. "Truth is leverage," she said. "Sometimes that's the only way to make people listen." Daniel went back to work. When he looked up again, she was gone, leaving a single page on the counter. An address, a date. Tomorrow. That night he couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan turned slow, the room thick with half-formed thoughts. He thought of Evan's voice saying his name for the first time. He thought of Richard's eyes the day he'd burned his empire in front of cameras. And he thought of all the things still hidden, all the rooms still locked. He sat up, pulled on his jacket, and stepped outside. The city was quiet, 1,000 windows glowing like secrets pretending to be light. He walked. The address led to an old storage building on the edge of downtown, a place where the past waited for someone brave enough to touch it. Inside, dust danced in thin lines of moonlight. Rows of sealed boxes labeled Archive, Cole Health, 2010-2018. He broke one open. Inside invoices, scans, patient IDs that matched the same pattern, including one name he knew by heart. Evan Cole. He flipped through the papers, faster pulse racing. Every page was proof of what the hospital had done: unnecessary procedures, trials without consent, data marked, suppressed. One file fell open near the bottom, older, faded. The name wasn't Evan. It was Miguel Reyes. Daniel froze. His hand trembled as he read. His son's name. Age 8, diagnosis acute hearing loss. Treatment plan experimental neural interface terminated due to lack of funding. He dropped the file. For a long moment, the world made no sound. The room spun, paper edges cutting air like knives. He remembered the nights Miguel had cried, the hospitals that turned them away, the doctors who said there was no money left in helping the poor. And now, in his hands, the same logo that had once sent him home empty. The same company whose building he now cleaned. Morning came like an accusation. Daniel walked through the hospital corridors without hearing anything. Every sound was memory. He passed Richard's office without looking in. He couldn't. When he reached the garden, Evan was there holding a sketchbook. "Mr. Daniel?" Daniel stopped. "You okay?" The boy nodded. "Dad said I might start school next month." "That's good. He wants you to come with us on the first day." Daniel smiled faintly. "I'll try." Evan tilted his head. "You're sad. Just tired." The boy studied him a moment longer, then went back to drawing. A hospital. A man with a mop. A sun above them both. Daniel turned away before the tears reached his eyes. That evening, Richard called for him. "Close the door," he said as Daniel entered. He looked exhausted. "I know where you went last night." Daniel didn't pretend. "Then you know what I found?" "I do." Richard's voice broke. "I didn't know about Miguel. I swear to you." Daniel believed him, but the truth didn't make it lighter. Richard slid a folder across the desk. "Those files shouldn't exist. They were supposed to be destroyed years ago. I guess some ghosts don't burn easy." Richard met his eyes. "Let me fix this." "You can't fix it. You can only face it. Then help me." Daniel stared at the man who had once tried to pay him for silence. "Why?" "Because it's my turn to listen." They went together, Richard, Daniel, and the commission investigator, to the federal inquiry room the next morning. It wasn't dramatic. No cameras, no speeches, just papers sliding across tables and truths written down at last. The official read names, dates, amounts. Daniel spoke when asked, nothing more. He told them what he'd seen. He told them what he'd lost. And when they asked why he'd come forward now, he said, "Because silence doesn't keep anyone safe. It just hides the wounds until they rot." The investigator wrote that down, underlined it twice. By the time they left, the sky had turned the color of ash. Reporters waited outside, hungry for angles. Richard ignored them. Daniel did too. They walked in silence until the crowd thinned. "You know they'll drag us through this," Richard said. Daniel nodded. "They'll call me a fraud again, and me a hypocrite." They both almost smiled. "At least we'll be right this time," Richard said. A week later, arrests began. Not loud, not televised. Quiet removals from offices, names fading from letterheads. One by one, the architects of the silence disappeared. Hospitals under Cole's former control reopened with new boards, new funding, new rules that required listening before treatment. But Daniel didn't stay to see the headlines. He stayed where he'd always belonged, beside those who couldn't speak yet. He repaired a wheelchair one morning, replaced a flickering bulb, helped a nurse lift a patient who was afraid of falling. Small things, the kind that actually mattered. When he passed the front desk, a receptionist stopped him. "Someone left this for you." It was a letter. No sender. Inside, a voice doesn't have to be loud to change the world. It just has to refuse to stop. No signature, but the handwriting was Richard's. That night, the foundation held a gathering in the main courtyard. Not a ceremony, just music, candles, and the quiet hum of gratitude. Families filled the space, some signing with their hands, others speaking softly. Evan sat on the steps beside Daniel, listening to the sounds he'd once never known. After a while, he said, "Dad told me you used to have a son." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." "What was his name, Miguel?" "What happened to him?" Daniel looked at the candlelight flickering on the boy's face. He stopped being heard. Evan thought for a moment. "Then I'll listen for him." Daniel swallowed hard. "You already are." Later, when the courtyard emptied, Richard approached. He carried 2 cups of coffee, both gone cold. "Old habit," he said. Daniel smiled. "Still working late?" "Always." They stood side by side, watching the lights turn off one by one. Richard said quietly, "You ever think we'll be forgiven?" Daniel didn't look at him. "Forgiveness isn't the point. What is, making sure no one else has to ask for it." Richard nodded slowly. "You're better at this than I am. I've had more practice." The night settled calm and deep. Children slept upstairs, their dreams finally quiet. The building breathed again, not the sterile air of hospitals, but something living. Daniel walked down the corridor, hand brushing the wall, feeling every heartbeat hidden inside it. When he reached the end, he stopped by a small plaque newly fixed beside the garden door. "The Miguel Reyes Wing. For those who were once unheard." He stared at it for a long time until his eyes blurred. Then he whispered, barely audible, "I hear you, son." Behind him, somewhere distant, Evan laughed in his sleep, and for the first time in forever, Daniel smiled without pain. The city was different now, though it didn't look that way. Cars still hurried, phones still rang, people still passed one another without seeing. But inside the hospital on the corner of Oak Ridge and 12th, something invisible had changed. It started in the morning rounds. Doctors who used to speak in codes now lowered their voices to comfort. Nurses who used to rush now waited a moment longer when a child tried to speak. Even the lights seemed softer. Daniel noticed it most in the quiet hours before dawn. He'd walk the halls and hear small sounds he'd never heard before. Laughter, conversation, a baby's first word echoing from pediatrics. Each sound carried a story that might have ended differently if someone hadn't stayed to listen. He never thought of himself as a symbol. He didn't want to. He just wanted to keep the place clean and the air gentle enough that hope could stay. Richard Cole had become a different kind of man, too. The newspapers still called him the CEO, but the title meant less now. He wore it like an apology. Most days, he worked from the Foundation's modest office, surrounded by boxes of letters from families whose children had found care here when no one else would take them. He read every one. Sometimes he cried. He didn't hide it anymore. He and Daniel rarely spoke of the past. It wasn't denial. It was survival. They both knew words couldn't change what was gone, but actions could keep it from happening again. One evening, a group of children performed a small recital in the garden. Simple songs, soft piano. Some sang, some signed with their hands. Evan was there, sitting at the edge of the crowd beside Daniel. The boy leaned close and whispered, "Dad said this place was built because of you." Daniel smiled. "That's not true." "Then who built it?" He looked toward the stage. "They did." Evan frowned, trying to understand. Daniel added, "Places like this only live if someone fills them with sound. It wasn't me who did that. It was you." Evan grinned. "You sound like my dad when he's trying to be wise." Daniel chuckled. Maybe he's getting better at it. When the recital ended, applause rolled through the garden like wind through leaves. Parents cried openly. Children bowed, laughing. Richard stood at the back, hands clasped behind him, eyes glistening in the dim light. For a moment he caught Daniel's gaze across the crowd. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Later, as everyone drifted inside, Daniel stayed behind to help fold chairs. The night was cool, stars faint but visible. He stacked the last row when a small voice called Mr. Daniel Evan stood there holding his sketchbook. "I made this for you." He handed it over. The drawing showed 3 figures standing beneath a hospital window, a man with a mop, another with a tie, and a boy between them holding both their hands. Above in block letters it said, "Listen." Daniel stared at it for a long time before he spoke. "This is beautiful." Evan shrugged. "It's true." He hesitated. "I used to be scared of silence. It felt like the world forgot me." Daniel nodded. "I used to think that too." "What changed?" "You spoke." The boy smiled shyly and hugged him. That night, Richard invited Daniel upstairs. He was sitting at his desk surrounded by files and coffee cups. On the wall hung the plaque for the Miguel Reyes wing. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Richard said quietly. "Conference in Geneva. They want me to talk about ethical reform." Daniel smiled faintly. "You going?" "Only because you'd tell me to." "I would." Richard leaned back. "You know, they used to call me a visionary. I thought it meant seeing further than others. Turns out it just meant I couldn't see what was right in front of me." Daniel said nothing. He didn't need to. After a pause, Richard asked, "Do you ever wonder why it was you that night?" "Out of everyone." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I used to. Not anymore." "Why not?" "Because I stopped trying to make sense of miracles. They don't ask permission." Richard smiled, the small, tired kind that means understanding. He opened a drawer and took out an envelope. Inside was a photograph the 3 of them taken weeks ago at the garden's opening. Evan grinning between them both, men looking like they'd forgotten which one was supposed to be in charge. Richard slid it across the desk. "Keep it," he said. "You'll need to remember this when the noise starts again." Daniel frowned. "What noise?" "The kind that always comes after peace, doubt, envy, rumor. People forget fast. Then we'll remind them again." Days passed quietly until the morning. Everything broke open again. A news alert. A leaked report. Former board member alleges fabricated miracle. The headlines spread like infection. Talk shows dissected every second of the old footage, freezing frames, questioning angles. How can a boy declared brain dead simply wake up? Who benefits from the story? Reporters returned to the foundation gates. Cameras crowded the sidewalk. Richard refused interviews. Daniel avoided them entirely. Inside, staff whispered. The patients felt the tension. The building's heartbeat grew anxious. One afternoon, a nurse found Evan crying in the playroom. "They're saying it wasn't real." He sobbed. Daniel knelt beside him. "Do you believe that?" The boy shook his head. "Then it's still real," Daniel said. "What if they don't?" "They don't have to." Evan looked up, tears streaking his cheeks. "You're not scared every day, but fear's just the noise before courage starts talking." By the next week, an official investigation began again. Government auditors, this time, chasing clicks more than truth. They questioned everyone, demanded records, asked the same things the last inquiry already answered. But now there was a new target, Daniel. A rumor said he'd staged it all, that he'd tampered with the machines to make the readings look like brain activity, that he'd been paid by Richard to create a miracle. It spread fast. Anonymous sources, unverified testimonies, the usual recipe for destruction. Richard stormed into the board office. "This is slander," the spokesperson shrugged. "Public wants closure. They want entertainment," Richard snapped. He went straight to Daniel's room. The old man was sitting by the window, polishing the frame of the listen drawing. Richard said, "They're coming for you." Daniel didn't look up. "They always do. I can stop it." "No, you'll make it worse." "Then what do we do?" "Nothing. Let truth work for once." 3 days later, the audit results leaked. No evidence of manipulation. Medical data consistent with spontaneous neural reactivation. The headlines flipped again. The miracle was real. People cheered. Commentators apologized. The same voices that called it fraud now called it divine. Daniel watched the news in the cafeteria and turned it off halfway. He'd stopped needing strangers to believe what he already knew. That weekend, the foundation held a small ceremony to honor new staff. Parents came. Children sang. Cameras were banned. Richard spoke briefly. No stage, no microphone, just him standing on the garden steps saying, "I used to think legacy meant leaving something behind. Now I know it means leaving someone better." He gestured to Daniel. "This man taught me that you don't have to shout to change the world. You just have to whisper when everyone else turns away." Applause rose like sunlight, not loud but warm. Evan ran up the steps and tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Say something," the boy urged. Daniel hesitated. He'd never liked speeches. But he looked out at the faces, parents, nurses, children, and said simply, "I was told once that silence keeps things safe. It doesn't. It just hides the people who need help most. All I did was listen. The rest was already waiting to be heard." That night, when the celebration ended, Daniel walked through the quiet halls one last time. He'd decided it was time to leave, not out of weariness, but because the place no longer needed him to keep it alive. He left his keys on the counter, took one slow walk through the Miguel wing, and stepped outside. The sky was clear, moon bright. A soft wind brushed through the trees. At the far end of the courtyard, Richard and Evan were sitting by the fountain. They saw him and waved. He waved back. The boy's laughter carried across the water, pure, unguarded. He stopped to listen. Not to the sound itself, but to what it meant. The echo of everything they'd fought through. The proof that what began as silence had turned into music. If you've stayed until now, maybe you've known your own silence, the kind no one else seems to hear. Maybe this story found you there. If it did, don't let it end in quiet. Keep it alive. Share what you felt. Tell someone what part of it spoke to you. Because every time a story like this is heard, another one begins. Daniel turned away from the fountain and walked toward the street. The city stretched ahead, same noise, same lights, same indifferent heartbeat. But this time he wasn't walking into it alone. He carried with him every sound that silence had tried to steal. A child's voice saying, "Dad," a man's whisper saying, "Thank you," and the quiet certainty that love once heard never truly fades. As he crossed the corner, a gust of wind rustled through the trees, lifting a whisper through the courtyard. It sounded almost like his son's laugh, soft, real, impossible. Daniel smiled, closed his eyes, and listened.